Skeleton Crew episode 4 is out. This one's a real snoozer. We get a little bit of attempt for character stuff, a little bit of attempt for world building. They try to give Neil an arc, but because the episodes are so short and because they can't really commit to anything beyond something for a retarded 5-year-old, we just don't get much out of it. And that's kind of been the theme of this whole season. They asked the droid to get them to Atten, and he takes them to Akron. And it's pretty much a rundown version of their world that we saw. And somehow the kids run the whole planet, but there's also adults, but the kids are kind of in charge. But they respect the kids, but the adults are still in charge. But the kids have a lot of influence for some reason. Not really too much going on with it, other than the fact that it confirms that there's some kind of experiment or program or something going on their planet, which we pretty much already knew from episode 1. So this episode just drags that out for 30 minutes or 28 minutes or whatever it is. Something that we already knew. And we still managed to get some pretty dumb stuff in here, even by this show's standards. Jod tries to steal from the kids their little galactic credits or their Republic credits. SM-33 catches him and calls him a traitor. Jod's like, why don't we see if you can jog your memory on this planet? And we get back to the kids wandering around. They recognize all this shit, kind of just filling time. And then eventually they run into little kid pirates. They call themselves the Troiks. And this little girl, Hannah, is the daughter of the guy who runs the planet, apparently. Or at least the Troiks. And they're having a faction war over furs and shit. And Neil's like, you shouldn't do violence. Violence is bad. Because this show has just foregone any effort into anything more complicated than violence bad. As if kids didn't fucking love, like, Fox and the Hound growing up. And the dynamics of friendship and duty. And they just can't comprehend those things now. Because kids have slowly become more retarded over time, apparently. The guy running shit says, well, you're kids and we value kids. So let's get you trained and then sacrifice you in the front line. And his daughter, Hannah, throws out that they can take him to their, essentially, headquarters of the planet if they fulfill their duty and lead the raid. And for whatever fucking reason, his English is perfectly normal. They all speak basic. But she speaks basic, aka English, with like a Russian accent. It's the weirdest decision. I don't get it. And it doesn't really make any sense. They just kind of threw it out there and let it hit the wall. So the dad gets annoyed at Hannah because she mentions the Fallen Sanctum. Again, this is like their corporate headquarters on their planet. Here's a part that I did kind of find amusing, mainly because it's Jude Law. He walks down the ramp with the robot. The rival faction gets him. He drops down to his knees and goes, oh, just kill me. Like he's just tired of dealing with all this shit. So I appreciated that because I feel the same watching this show. So Neil wants to be a pacifist, and Hannah, who refuses to leave this violent world, admires that about him. So she takes him to go show him the rest of the place. Neil gives his ration away to some poor hungry kids, and Hannah is looking at him like she wants a piece of Neil's trunk. Of course, this goes nowhere because it's a kid's show, and they interact for about 10 fucking minutes in this episode, and presumably she's gone for the season. Here's where he sits her down and gives her the lesson that violence is bad, even though it's all she's ever known as a literal child soldier, and somehow that's convincing. So the kids shoot a few guns. The leader guy says they have promise, lead us into battle. Kind of a pretty dark message about child soldiers and grooming in there that they don't really touch on, and I'm not sure if the show is actually aware of how dark this actually is, because it's never played up as a very serious thing. Maybe these writers haven't seen like Blood Diamond or something. So they're being forced to lead the raid at literal gunpoint. And what do you think? A massive coincidence so we can get rid of this plotline in one episode. Jod shows up. Jude Law's face here pretty much matches what I look like watching this episode. But he's like, oh, I made a deal with the Hanadas or whatever the fuck they're called. And they let me go. So we see the supervisor's tower, which is the headquarters of these experiment planets. And they're not allowed up there on their planet. Luckily, this elevator works right away with no issues, even though the entire tower is filled with holes and rusted steel and shit. Neil asks Hannah to come with him, and she's like, nah, I'm going to make peace on my planet because that sounds nice. Gives him a kiss on the cheek and tells him to fuck off. So they find these coordinates here to planets that are very similar named to theirs, and then they find theirs have been wiped out. They have a low effort character moment here where Fern's upset that she's not qualified for this, and then we had to listen to Wim kiss her ass. Really annoying. And then of course she's like, I'm not a droid. And then she comes to a realization, and she tries to order SM-33 to overwrite his memory and remember the coordinates because his memory was ruled not to by the previous captain. He freaks the fuck out, says, I was also ordered that if anyone came looking, to rip him limb from limb. And he slowly peg legs his way after the kids. Neil throws a rock. Jod is able to sneak up on him and hit his power button. And Neil passes out, and that's the episode. I guess next time they'll realize, presumably, that they can go to the other planets with similar names and find the and coordinates there. And I guess they're without the droid now because he's been possessed by his previous rules. So yeah, this show is like glacially paced. Every fucking episode, they're stretching to 30 minutes. I don't know why they didn't just make it like 5 episodes and speed this shit up. It's hard for me to imagine a kid watching this and not being bored out of his fucking mind because there's just so little happening and it happens so spread out and so slow with nothing interesting in between. Each week, this show just gets more and more forgettable and somehow manages to keep filling runtimes of like 28 minutes with 6 minutes of credits and a minute and a half of recap and then the song. So the listed time is like 36 minutes, but really it's probably 28-ish. Pretty bad when you're trying to just fill a time like that. Like, you know, they didn't have any more ideas, or they just didn't have the budget to do anything for 10 episodes. So they just stretched everything as much as they could. If you have insomnia, I highly recommend this episode. I'm going to leave it here for this one. Let me know what you think in the comments. I try to respond to all the ones that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.